Please could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your programme once again.
Hello everyone, this is your host Steve Marinucci and welcome to another Beatles News Briefs podcast. On today's show we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go back and look at some of the highlights of the shows for 2025. We had some incredible interviews and we wanted to bring some of those highlights to you. We'll also have some late-breaking Beatle news. So let's get started. On one of our earliest shows, we featured Candy Leonard, author of the great book Beatleness, and Al Sussman, author of Changing Times, 101 Days That Shaped a Generation, talking about America before Beatlemania. And one of the things they discussed was the music America was hearing on their radio stations. Here's Candy and Al talking about that music.
When I first heard I Want to Hold Your Hand, to ears that were, doo-wop and music and girl group pop, Brill Building pop, it was especially those first chords of I Want to Hold Your Hand sounded like something from Mars. Their sound was something that was very new. I take issue with the people that say that the years between when Elvis went into the army and when I Want to Hold Your Hand broke out were nothing but a vast wasteland of novelty songs and teen idols, things like that. In 1963, there was a lot of great music here in America.
I think that trope is rooted in the fact that white America was maybe not listening to Stax and Motown at that time, but they were putting out a lot of really great music. There was a lot of bland cookie cutter crooners were out, but yes, I think there was good music at the time. It wasn't all horror. It wasn't all Pat Boone singing Tutti Frutti.
Thank God.
Sure, there was a lot of great R&B, but also you had the Beach Boys, you had the Four Seasons. You did have this, the birth of, the new folk music, with Peter, Paul, and Mary and the Kingston Trio, and of course,
But they, there was something different about them. They sounded different. They looked different. And they took all those influences. Really, all of them grew up in musical households. They were, and of course, being in Liverpool, which was a crossroads in a way for culture and different influences. So, they kind of baked all that into it. And so it was something new.
That last clip was from show number 85. The next two clips were from shows 86 and 87, where we got eyewitness reports from P.J. McClellan and Bob Gannon on the shows that Paul McCartney did at the Bowery Ballroom in New York City. These were arranged at the, or they were announced at the very last minute, and you had to really maneuver to get tickets, and both of these guys got tickets and gave us their thoughts on the shows. In this clip, Bob Gannon talks about some of the songs that Paul did over the two nights, and also talks about how loud the singing was with the Hey Jude chorus. Here's Bob Gannon.
This was the loudest I ever heard sing along. The voices were just echoing off those walls in that small joint. My ears were still ringing 2 hours later, and that was just from the Hey Jude sing along.
And DJ said the volume was, I think he calls it McCartney level volume. Is that what you?
It was, the volume was good.
Okay.
And when you look at the first night, I think we got a better set list.
Okay.
So we were happy with that. We got every night, and we got Getting Better and Flaming Pie, which I haven't heard him do in a long time. So it was fun to hear those songs again.
On show number 80, we talked about the Beatles and the Monkees with Fred Velez, the author of two books on the Monkees, A Little Bit Me and A Little Bit You, and A Little Bit Me and A Little Bit You, Volume 2. Fred's known the Monkees individually for many years. He interacted with them many times, and he had many anecdotes about being with them and seeing them in concert. But we both agreed on one thing about the fact that the Monkees have been snubbed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and they deserve to be in it. And I interviewed all of them, and they'd had basically opinions that they really didn't care. But Fred felt differently, and I asked him how he thought the Monkees felt about being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Here was Fred's answer.
And again, none of the Monkees, none of the individuals, especially Nesmith, were mentioned. I keep thinking that they'll smarten up and they'll do something.
I totally agree with you. They long deserved to be there, and they should have been there while all the members were still alive. Now, sadly, we only have Mickey left.
You ever talk to them about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? In my conversations with them, they all just said, we don't care. I believe that they would have been very happy to be in it.
Davey and Peter were the most said that we deserve to be there. Mike and Mickey were a bit more ambivalent about it. Davey, in particular, he was on TV. One of his last interviews was talking about why the Monkees are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
On one of our first shows this year, we featured John Brower, who was one of the promoters of the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival in 1969 that featured John and Yoko and the Plastic Ono Band and a whole bunch of rock and roll veterans like Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Gene Vincent, Chuck Berry, and Bo Diddley. And it also featured Alice Cooper and the Doors. And what an incredible lineup of acts to have. And here's John talking about the lineup that he had for that show.
It was an incredible evening of artists, from Chuck Berry to Gene Vincent to Alice to Little Richard to John and Yoko, Plastic Ono Band, and the Doors. I'd like to have that bill right now. I think I could probably sell out a 40-acre field.
I found an interview that John did, and I'm not sure what paper this is from. I'm guessing maybe the Daily Mirror. And he talks about how he connected with you. And he said the whole thing was a laugh because I got the call at 9 o'clock on Friday night, left Saturday morning at 3 a.m. And before they'd even hung up, I had the group together. He said it was a fantastic bill. Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Gene Vincent, Bo Diddley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and the Doors. And Yoko did a number which was half rock and half madness, and it really freaked him out. After Yoko had been on for about a quarter of an hour, we all left our amps going like the clappers and had a smoke up on the stage. That's when they stepped in. The whole crowd was chanting, "Give peace a chance."
Yeah, I know. It was a magical moment for John because he, as he said, later he hadn't been so excited or had such a good time in his whole life, because here was an audience of over 20,000 people giving him acknowledgement that Give Peace a Chance meant so much to them that they wanted to sing along, and they were lighting the matches and lighters that Kim Fowley had requested. Now, Melanie had candles on stage at Woodstock. There was another band that asked people to light matches and lighters, but this was the first time that a performer had been welcomed to the stage with matches and lighters. And it was appropriate that it was for John Lennon to assuage his fear. He was always known to be nervous before going on stage, even back in the Cavern days and in Hamburg. The movie should have been dedicated to Kim Fowley. Had I had any kind of control, I would have insisted that at the end, this movie is dedicated to the memory of Kim Fowley. Because, first of all, Kim Fowley suggested that when we were going to cancel the show, you must call John Lennon and invite him. And John went for it. Kim Fowley told me he won't be able to say no. He loves all these bands. And John went one step further and said, we want to play. And then the matches and lighters created a magic that night. And that's what inspired it to continue to this day, where it's a tradition with cell phones. It's that festival, that experience, that night.
On that show, we also featured Pierce Hemmingson, who is the expert on the Beatles in Canada. And he revealed a couple of things to us. This is the first talking about Peter Jackson, and it's something that's very exciting, and it actually, I believe, came true in if you watch the updated Beatles anthology, uh, because the song "My Girl Is Red Hot" definitely sounded much improved, and it seems like the Beatles have started working on improving the sound quality of the Hamburg tapes and hopefully releasing them again. But anyway, here's what Pierce said about that.
So let me ask you about the Hamburg tapes. You said you saw Peter Jackson talking about this at the Fest for Beatle fans.
Yeah. So
Talk about what's going on there, and has anything moved on this? Is this for real that they're working on this?
well, what he told the crowd in the room was that he purchased the original tapes from the estate, I guess, of King Size Taylor or whoever owned them, and that he was working on them. And I think these are, you will know, these are from Star Club, but when they had Ringo, right? It was December of 62.
Mm-hmm.
They were issued as a double album back in the 70s, but I bought that thing and the quality wasn't very good. So I think the thinking is that his software will do something amazing with those tapes so that they're more listenable. I think the problem for a lot of younger Beatle fans is that the quality of some of the early stuff isn't very, they're used to hearing stuff on a download or a stream, and it's tough to listen to.
Right.
And so I think that would be the ultimate, just like he did for the Get Back project, the film. I mean, what a refreshing thing. I followed Peter Jackson with his World War I film and what he did with that. He is amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
how that comes out, we don't know. I haven't heard anything since then. So all I can think of is what he said was that it's promising and it's not there yet, but they're going to get there. So he doesn't seem like a guy who's going to give up on something like that.
And if you were listening carefully on that show, Piers also made another prediction that actually did come true. He predicted that we might see a new Beatles anthology, and of course, we now have. Here's Piers with that prediction. This is way back in the beginning of 2025.
I was in the UK in January, and 2025 is the 30th anniversary of Anthology.
Right.
So the rumor, I don't want to spread rumors, but the rumor that I've heard is that they are working on an updated anthology. So it is possible that some of these Hamburg era recordings might form part of an upgraded. I'm guessing, this would be another Disney Plus release,
Yes.
just like Beatles 64 and Get
Right.
Back and Let It Be. And then, I don't think, I don't think the world is the same as it was in 1995, where we all wanted the vinyl and the CD and the VHS tapes and the CD or the DVDs. This will be about having something on a Disney Plus visual, platform. I guess they'll sell stuff too, but that's what I think is going to happen. I could be way off base, but they can't just reissue something like this when 30 years have passed and they have all this new technology and they have all this other material that they could throw into the mix.
Right. Right. There is on Facebook, I'm seeing it all the time that people do want physical stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're right. I'm sure that Disney Plus will have the first crack at the
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, we'll see where that goes. I hope
I,
that
I
On show 92, we called Susan Ryan at the Fest for Beatle fans in Jersey City and talked to her directly while she was there. And she told us some great stories about things that have happened. And here's one of the things she said.
You never know who you might run into at these fests. I mean, I know that people have shown up. There was one year I missed them, but there was one year when Patty Boyd was here, and late at night, Ron Wood showed up to see his friend Patty and jammed with a couple of the bands that were playing in the lobby. And I found out about it the next day, completely missed it. But you never know who you might run into. He just showed up because he knew Patty was in town, and there you go.
In show 93, we interviewed our old friend Jude Sutherland Kessler, the author of the John Lennon series, the latest volume of which is called Some Forever, Shades of Life Part 2. And she talked about what it was like for the Beatles in 1965. How were the disc jockeys treating them? They were pretty much willing to do anything to get a Beatle to talk to them or to be on their show or to play Beatles songs if they could get a Beatles song before anybody else. They would do anything. But I mean, people like Murray the K, for example, the rivalry between WABC and WMCA in New York. It was a whole amazing situation there that was going on with trying to promote the Beatles and trying to promote your station.
Yeah, they are still very friendly with the DJs, and they do special things for them, and they're kind to them, and I don't see any antagonism between the DJs and the Beatles. And let me clarify, there are still some journalists who are incredibly polite and kind to the Beatles. Not everybody is against them. I mean, for example, Ivor Davis, who the Beatles and Me on tour,
right.
He toured with them every single day of 1964, and he's with them for the Hollywood Bowl and for San Diego, and he's one of only two people. Chris Hutchins and Ivor Davis are the only two that get to go with them to meet Elvis. And they have a great relationship. Chris Hutchins has a good relationship with them. Don Short, on and off. I mean, he is nice to their face, but sometimes cuts them behind their back. And they know that, and they're very suspicious. But not all of the press, they get along with some. It's just there is a contingent that started. It's kind of like the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl and then going beat. Suddenly everybody that was for you when you won the first time and then you won the second time, when you're coming back for the three-peat, they're like, ugh, I'm getting sick of those Chiefs. They win all the time, I'm like, why can't you just love a winner? But people don't. After a while, they want to see them fall.
In show number 95, we talked to Beatles historian Bruce Spicer and Michelle Wood Murata, who is the daughter of Randy Wood, who was the president of VJ Records when the Beatles were on the label. And they told us some great stories, and one of my favorites is this one where Michelle talks about the fact that VJ actually bootlegged the Beatles. Here's that story.
Like, I was 14, 15. I didn't care. And I didn't know. I had no clue. To me, it was like, oh boy, I'm in the record business. But I didn't know we were bootlegging our own albums.
Yeah,
And
VJ was not just the Beatles, that was primary, but also Gene Chandler was also getting bootlegged as well.
That I didn't know.
Ones that clearly look very similar to the 1970s VJ introducing the Beatles that were, politely said, counterfeited would be more accurate, actually.
Right. But with the Beatles, we had Introducing the Beatles, the two Beatle albums.
Right.
Beatles and Frank Ifield.
Yeah, we had the Beatles versus the Four Seasons.
Yeah, I never saw that bootleg, though. I remember seeing that legitimately, of course, but if y'all did bootleg it, it wasn't in massive numbers like Introducing the Beatles and the Beatles and Frank Ifield.
I remember Ifield a lot. That was one I remember seeing. Another thing that they did, and this is actually not, I don't think this is bootleg, is that VJ put stickers on the top of songs, pictures, and stories to promote the upcoming, or I assume it was the upcoming concerts.
Once again, the brilliance of VJ marketing, and probably Jay Lasker's idea, but could have been Randy's. What they did was they, first of all, introducing the Beatles itself, reached a point where it sold about 1.2 million copies, and it wasn't selling anymore. And that was in the spring of 64. And VJ knew they were not going to have any future Beatle albums to put out. One of the other things that was hurting it was the cover was not a very flattering photograph of the group. In the back of it, since they had lost the liners that EMI had sent them and couldn't ask for new ones, was boring. It just listed the names of the songs on each side.
Right.
Jay Lasker got the idea to put out what he described as a magazine cover. That album was called Songs, Pictures, and Stories of the Fabulous Beatles, and it was a gatefold cover, although the front flap of it was only 2/3, so that you had a picture of the Beatles on and the title of the album, and then on the part that wasn't there, it had the four faces of the Beatles. When you opened it up, you also had information about each of the Beatles, like how much they weighed, what was their height, what was their favorite color, what was their favorite movies, what type of women did they like, and they had that on that album. And if you bought that album, the record inside was Introducing the Beatles. And Capitol Records sued them for that and argued they couldn't do this. And actually, Capitol didn't get sued. VJ was told by Capitol and EMI they could not release that album. And actually, they sued to have the right to release it. And they won that because VJ had decent lawyers on that case. And Capitol argued that you can't do this. Your contract doesn't let you do, you can only put out the albums you had. And VJ said, that's all we're doing. We're putting out Introducing the Beatles in a new cover. And Capitol said, well, you can't do that. And VJ said, well, you do that all the time, Capitol. Here's a Nat King Cole album with one cover, and here's that same album with a different cover. So the judge ruled in VJ's favor and said that since all they were doing was putting out Introducing the Beatles in a new cover, that was okay. It was called Songs, Pictures, and Stories of the Fabulous Beatles.
Right.
So what they did was, after the Beatles' appearances in the United States, they got stickers and what they called concert banners. These were not sold at the concerts. And I know from the paperwork, this didn't happen until about October of 64. So souvenir of that picture of the concert at the Hollywood Bowl, and that banner would say that in the date of the concert. Those will be sold in record stores in LA in October of 64.
In show number 96, we had author Madeline Beccaro, who wrote the book In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono, a great biography of Yoko Ono that we heartily recommend. And she talks about what effect Yoko had on the Beatles as a group and also on the partnership of John and Paul.
John starts doing Revolution 9 and this and that, and Paul's like, hey, wait a minute, he's got the credit for avant-garde one and I'm soppy. So it was inching its way into the Beatles anyway with Paul. I don't know if he was really going to apply it in such a stark manner as on Revolution 9. In fact, he was against that. But influence on the Beatles after when she was around, there was what? They were doing Magical Mystery Tour, right? She went to the Fool on the Hill session. She didn't change Magical Mystery Tour all that. In fact, she never heard Strawberry Fields till after the fact. And an art dealer played it for her and said, what do you think of this pop music? And she said, that's pretty cool for a pop tune. All the dissonance and the strange sounds. She really liked it. But that was way after. She didn't know anything about that until, then they do Sergeant Pepper and then they do whatever. And Yoko has no effect on that. But you want to say she affected them badly, but really, she was just sitting there in the studio with John because he asked her to come along. He was very insecure and jealous and he wanted her with him all the time. And if you can see in the Get Back sessions, she's just sitting there knitting, crocheting, whatever she's doing, reading. And she even said, I was in a dream world. I wasn't thinking what the Beatles were doing. I was thinking of my next artwork. Effect on the Beatles, they made her affect them mentally more than she really did. They were just so against having her around. So they let it get to them, but she wasn't doing anything to them.
Show number 97 was a great interview with Lori Kay, author of Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview. The program featured some audio clips from some of her interviews beside the Beatles, but we also have clips in there of talking to Paul, George, as well as John. And it's a great program to hear if you didn't hear it the first time. But one of the scariest moments in the interview was when she talked about her encounter with the jerk of all jerks, and I'm not going to mention his name because you all know who I'm talking about, outside the Dakota before Lennon was shot. And it was very scary to hear her talk about this again. It was still very emotional for her. Here's Lori talking about that encounter.
Well, I never say his name ever because I don't want to give him the publicity. And he was a creepy, really creepy guy who accosted me the minute I walked out of the Dakota front door after the interview. And he started bugging me and asking me, did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph? What'd he say? What'd he say? What'd he say? Then he followed me down the sidewalk as I was walking to my friend's office. And he kept saying, did you talk to him? Did you get his autograph? What'd he say? What'd he say? I just kept telling him to leave. And finally, he stopped following me and turned around. And I still feel guilty to this day for not letting the Dakota security team know about this creep, because maybe they would have been able to get rid of him so he wouldn't bother other people in front of the Dakota, and maybe he wouldn't have been there to kill John, and maybe they would have looked at him and seen that he was carrying a gun in the pocket of the coat he was wearing, which I didn't. So, like I said, I still feel guilty to this day.
In show number 98, we interviewed Chris O'Dell, and she was a real delight to talk to. She, of course, is the subject of the song Miss O'Dell that George Harrison recorded. And she talked about what it was like to have a song written for you by a Beatle.
He didn't think I wanted to be famous. I don't think that was where he was going. But he knew the power of the Beatles. And he knew that if he wrote a song about me with my name in it, it would probably follow me through my life. I don't know if he realized how much, but so I think it was his humor mixed with sincerity. You know, I wrote this song about you and it's going to make you famous.
What do you think of it now when you hear it?
Oh, I love hearing it because, but you know, it was my ringtone on my phone for years. I thought,
wow,
I'd get it back, but my son had to do it and I don't know how to do it. So I have to get him to do it again because I thought that was a perfect ringtone.
That's all right.
It still amazes me that he wrote it, to be honest. I mean, he must have a lot of time on his hands. But the regular version, the non-laughing version, obviously was supposed to be the record, but Capitol said, no, we want Miss O'Dell as the A side because, you know, it's another side of you. It doesn't look like all that spiritual stuff. It takes away from it. But George quite rightly chose Give Me Love, Give Me Peace as the A side.
Miss O'Dell is not the only song written about you.
No, Leon Russell wrote 2 songs, Pisces Apple Lady and
Hummingbird.
Hummingbird. Yeah. Hummingbird was so beautiful.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, those 2 songs he wrote for me and George's song. And I think that might be it.
Is there another? Is there more that we don't know about?
There was a guy from Memphis, Don Nix. Don and I were dating for a while, and he called me up one day and said, "Oh, I've written a song for you. It's called Miscellaneous." All right, thanks, Don.
We have had some fun shows this year. One of the ones that was really the most fun was in March when we tracked down the man and his 2 friends who had found what they said was a rare copy of the Beatles' Decca auditions. The tape had some editing tape on it. It sounded, according to them, better than the other versions that had been out there. And other people had listened to it and agreed that this was something rare. And when we talked to Rob Frith, who was one of the 3 in March, he said this.
And here's the other thing. I've said in the media that if Paul McCartney wants this tape, I will give it to him for free. So, like, I'm
as long as you put it in his hands,
and as long as he takes me for dinner. But that's and he has to pay.
And I'll drive you guys over.
But seriously, I'm not someone that's trying to make a bunch of money from this. So I have nothing to gain by sharing this. I'm a big Beatle fan, as all of us are here, and we just kind of want it to get out there that people could hear it. And if Paul can get it, that would, is one of the guys that played in the band in 1962. I think they deserve to have it.
Yeah, he should have it.
Well, he said that offhand, and I don't know if he thought it was going to happen. I mean, he hoped it would happen. I wasn't sure it was going to happen, but what do you know? It did. And we got Rob back on the show, and he told us about meeting Paul McCartney.
Every single person I met there was really nice. So we're talking. They're saying that's really cool about the tape. And then all of a sudden, Paul just wanders over and calls me by name, and he gives me a big hug and says, just wanted you to know that nobody does that anymore. And he says, I'm really thankful for what you're doing. And he meant to just give him this thing for free and not try to make any money on it. And it was flattering that he said that, but I wasn't thinking in those terms. I thought I was doing the right thing. Anyway, yeah, I know. Right from the start, I was never trying to do anything else other than that. But anyway, so then he was like super friendly. I introduced him to my family. And then he said, "Look, there was a couch there in the middle of this room, just on its own, like the only furniture there." And he says, "Let's sit down and chat." We sat down on the couch. He puts his arm around me and we're holding on to the tape. And then I realized that they're filming the whole thing. They're filming us getting there, but I didn't notice it. I guess I was so in awe of Paul. I was just looking at him and didn't realize what was going on. We weren't allowed to take photos, but they had a professional photographer there who I was introduced to after the fact. Super nice guy. They said that they would send me photos. And then we just sat there for 40 minutes talking on this couch. Again, just like talking to an old friend. Except it wasn't an old friend. It was somebody I've known for a long time from media, but he was that friendly and that chill and nice that it was like that. I was told that he doesn't like to sign stuff, but I brought these two for the family, and two of them I really wanted to get signed were pictures that I just acquired this last year of the Beatles when they played in Vancouver in 1964. They were crystal clear, obviously original photos. And I said, I know you don't like to sign, Paul, but is there any? And I hadn't even finished saying it. He says, of course I'll sign for you.
So the first time we talked to him was in March. The second was in October. And he told us a lot of things about the meeting with Paul McCartney, and he met the band and everything. And it was a great story. But then there was something else that happened, totally unexpected, later that evening. And here's that story.
My son Ben is beside me, and I see the people sitting there, and I nudge my son. I said, that looks like Julian Lennon sitting down. And he says, no, it's not. And then he looks at his phone, and that's Julian Lennon. And Julian Lennon was sitting at the next table, and I wanted to go say something because, like, I was just with Paul McCartney for the afternoon, and all of a sudden I run into Julian Lennon. It's got to be because it's L.A., right? Like, there's so many famous people there. But It was so unbelievable. And my family said, don't bother him, don't bother him. So I didn't go there and say anything. I regret it now. But my son pretended he was taking a family photo as he got a photo of him in the background. So it was him. In fact, I just did a podcast with someone from Australia the other day. And I think he either knows Julian or has access to him, and sent him the little clip that he recorded of me telling that story. And Julian said, next time he sees me, tell him to say hi.
Oh,
I thought that was very sweet.
cool.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's basically it. It's Paul's got the tape. I don't, but I have the memory of meeting him, which is a huge thing for me.
We devoted show 103 to a big discussion of the John Lennon Power to the People box set. And we had two guests in the show. that we were really happy to have with us. The first was our good friend Candy Leonard, author of the wonderful book Beatleness. And she talked about how Yoko helped John Lennon evolve into a feminist. Here's Candy Leonard.
He seemed to genuinely come to believe that it was foolish for humanity to squander the intelligence and energy and creativity of half the population of the world, you know? And so I think he really did evolve in a genuine way and did develop a genuine feminist consciousness, which I don't know that he would have had he not been with Yoko.
I was fortunate to talk to her in person. She definitely felt very equal to him. And, you know, there was no getting around the fact when you talked to her that they were equals. And that was one thing that I took away from talking to her the first time. My first interview was really kind of interesting because she admitted that she surfed the internet. It was quite an interesting conversation. And they also had the immigration thing going on.
Right.
And that was really tough for them. You know, that was a big thing that hung over them for quite a while until
I remember that.
And yeah.
Also, it's, you know, it was because of his wanting to protect her when they originally were busted. It was the reason, wasn't that, am I remembering this incorrect?
He took all the responsibility for the drugs, and he made sure that they didn't have anything to hang on her, and they did not charge her. They dismissed the charges against her.
Right. But he was charged, which was the excuse given for not allowing him to easily become a citizen. Yeah.
Right. And they
Now,
and they
I
went,
remember that I was living in New York at the time. It's funny, I always think back, I grew up in New York, so I was still a kid, I like to say at that time. I remember when that, you know, sort of followed their life in New York as a fan. I always wonder why I never went down to Bank Street or the Dakota. It did never occur to me to try to do that, which I very much regret now because I'm sure I would have been able to run into them had I tried.
The second half of that show was an interview with Gary von Skyok, who was bass player with Elephant's Memory, the band that played with John Lennon on Sometime in New York City, and also at Madison Square Garden when John played live. And he told many great stories, but I think the one that I thought was the most fun to hear was when they actually met John for the first time, and how the union of Elephant's Memory and John Lennon and Yoko Ono came together. Here's Gary talking about meeting John Lennon.
John had that white suit on from Abbey Road, and my knees just buckled. I mean, we were just looking at each other going, holy moly.
How was he to work with? How long did it take, or when did you guys decide to go, you know, when did you all decide to get together? Was it right away or?
Well, I guess you'd say right away. It was that night.
Oh, was it?
We had played for 3 or 4 hours. I mean, our fingers were sore. We just couldn't play anymore. We were doing all those rock and roll songs like Dizzy Miss Lizzy and just everything we could think of besides Beatles songs. We didn't do any Beatles songs the first night. Old rock and roll stuff, 2 or 3 things that I guess would have been on the rock and roll album that he later did. You know, songs that he loved from childhood. I mean, Elvis tunes, and we actually did the Hound Dog at the Garden later on.
That's not the stuff that's on the box. This is before that, right?
Oh yeah, this is just the jam for the night that we met.
Did you tape it?
No, I wish I had. Because we were right in a recording studio. It would have been so easy. But I think everybody was just so flustered and taken back by what was going on. Even the owner of the studio, Bob Pruitt, was running around like a chicken with his head cut off. He couldn't do enough for us or John. He was being great because I think he actually canceled some time after us because going so long, and that's unheard of for a studio.
Right.
But about 4 in the morning, Steve, we were tired of playing, and just they popped up with the question, like, we would like to join your band. And we just looked at each other and holy crap, this just can't be happening. I mean, it's like a dream come true, you know.
In Show 101, we talked to Simon Weitzman, who was director and writer for the movie, A Love Letter to the Beatles. He was also director for Miss Odell, if that name sounds familiar to you. But anyway, with A Love Letter to the Beatles, they had an interesting beginning. They had done some crowdfunding, and then the money disappeared. And this is how he talked about what happened next.
Neil Innes phoned me and said, I'm doing a project with Pledge Music, and I can see that you're doing something similar. You're doing something for the sort of a Beatle related project. I'm trying to get the money out of my account. There's nothing there. And it turned out that they'd gone bust and kind of run away, So I think it's
You lost all that money that you had raised with them?
as far as we know, we lost all the money, and the fans
Oh
lost all the
my.
money. So I sort of made a
Oh,
pledge. So me and my friends made a pledge, literally a pledge at that point, that we would get it re-going again. And if we did get it going, we'd manage to get the list of what people were due, their rewards and things like DVDs and that kind of stuff, that we would honor it, when we finally finished the project. So eventually we went back and relaunched on Indiegogo and very specifically said to people that had joined us the first time, you don't need to do anything, we will just cover this. But a lot of people knew what had happened, so they kind of pledged again, on Indiegogo, which was really fantastic.
wow.
It showed
That's
some real kind of family sort of love, for the project. So at that point, we were able to really complete it, and it's taken a very long time. We've had also, COVID, of course, happened in the middle of it,
right.
and I lost my dad right at the beginning of it, and other family members were taken ill, and it's, so I had quite a big sort of extended kind of area in that where I had to kind of look after things, but eventually kind of got it all going, and then we've had other issues to kind of get over, and then of course you have to put it all through legal, don't you? So
Right.
so we had, so we found some fantastic lawyers who have been really great and very helpful. But that whole process again takes a year.
In show 104, we talked to Andrew Reeve, the author of Turn Me On Deadman, the complete story of the Paul McCartney death hoax. It's a fascinating subject because after all these years, it's still being discussed, and there are people that still hold on to that belief. But one of the best stories in that whole tale is the disc jockey on WABC in New York who got fired on the air for disobeying his station program manager's orders and talking about it. And Andrew and I talked about that here.
Roby Young actually made an air check of the night he was carrying on about the Paul is dead hoax, rumor, whatever you want to call it, live on the air on WABC in New York. In the middle of the night, he figured, okay, it's the middle of the night. I'm the overnight guy. No one's going to stop me, so I can talk about whatever I want, even though Rick Sklar, the manager of WABC, told him not to. We are not going to give this any credence, this Paul is dead thing. So we are not talking about it, and I forbid you from talking about it. But Roby said, you know what? I'm going to go on the air and talk about it. I'm Roby Young. I can talk about it. So he went on the air and he talked about the rumor. And then Rick Sklar heard this and he rushed to the station and yanked him off the air. But the air check exists. And actually, if you go to my Facebook page, I posted the Roby Young air check.
He was really ranting. I can understand why they pulled him off the air. He didn't sound very sane. I mean,
He sounded like he was losing his marbles.
right. Other disc jockeys talked about it too, but not the way he did.
A lot of disc jockeys and a lot of stations decided that they were going to use it for their own self-promotion. And it was amazing how many radio stations played along. They gave their disc jockeys clearance to go ahead and put together specials. If not talk about it live, which they did also, but they also went into their little production booths and created 1 hour specials that would air like on the weekends, pre-taped with all the clues playing backwards and everything. Russ Gibb had his over at WKNR that he did with a couple of his co-workers, John Small and Dan Carlisle. They all together called Eric Clapton and got sound bites from him, and called Derek Taylor, got sound bites from him, played the songs backwards on the air. And a lot of stations did that throughout the country. If you go onto eBay, you can find them. You can buy the cassettes or CDs that people have made of these air checks. It's fascinating.
Show number 105 was a special show for me personally. We had the great Charles Rosenet, who, if you've been around Beatle fandom, you know he's into so many things. He does tours, he writes books, he puts on shows. He just does everything, and he never stops. And we also had Chachi Lopresti, who's the host of Breakfast with the Beatles in several states, including Massachusetts, where I'm originally from. And as it turns out, in case you don't know, Chachi and I are cousins. And this is the first time we had done a show together this way. And it was great to talk to him. And one of the things we talked about was the history of the Beatles in Boston. And being, from Boston and having so much time in Boston, connection with Boston, he knows about the Beatles in Boston. And we discussed that.
And for everybody that's in Massachusetts and New England, I mean, the Beatles were such a big part of the New England history.
Well, whenever your city is a destination for the Beatles, you go down in Beatles history, and they came to Boston twice, so we were lucky because I remember kids would do petitions and stuff.
I only remember them there once. I remember the Suffolk Downs.
September 12th, 1964, the Boston Garden.
Boston Garden.
Yeah.
Okay. I barely remember the Boston Garden, but I do remember Suffolk Downs, and I remember that because my parents wouldn't let me go.
Well, last night I was at an event with a woman who sat in the first row for that show, and she shared her recollections, and so that was great.
Wow. Boston really doesn't get the credit for, the Beatles that they should have. And, and Chachi, you probably know about this. WBZ used to get imports from the UK, and they used to play the songs on the imports that weren't released in Boston before they were released by Capitol.
Wow,
so
that's an
we heard a lot of. I remember that very much. That we heard a lot of Beatles songs early that the rest of America didn't hear.
Well, I was always carrying my transistor radio. So.
Yeah, I mean those were the days. Barney Ginsberg used to listen to Barney Ginsberg, and right. that recreated program he did for the Cruising series. I love it. And
I'm listening to it right now on my radio.
Are you really?
See, Charles?
Oh wow!
On my radio, I'm listening.
I love it.
You guys, I like that. I love that radio too. It's a Pepsi Cola machine. That looks great.
Yeah, they gave them to the Beatles when they were in New York.
I was a Bronx boy, guys, so I was listening to WMCA, WABC, and probably WINS. And
when we moved to the New York area, I listened to them too.
In show number 106, we talked to Jeff Fisk, Margot Winnick, Tom Craig, and Sarah Schmidt about the time when George Harrison went to Florida. He made a trip to Florida with Pattie Boyd, and little had been known about it, but some pictures had surfaced, and they were shown in Florida recently, and we got to the principals who helped make it happen. And in this clip, Jeff Fisk talks about the day George Harrison met a pet mountain lion.
I showed her the first picture, which is one of George in that same courtyard with a group of people, still not really remembering it. Then there was a shot of George down on his knees petting a pet mountain lion. And still it didn't hit her. The last picture was her standing over the mountain lion with her arms folded like this. And as soon as she saw that picture, you could see it in her face. She's like, oh my God, now I remember going down there. She said on that day, it was because in the comments on Meet the Beatles for Real, it said that a fellow that was staying there living at the apartment building, the Gregg Apartments, said that it was a friend of the family that brought over their pet mountain lion in their station wagon. Well, Patty said it was a friend of Louise, his sister Louise Harrison. She drove over from Sarasota, and it was a friend of hers that brought the mountain lion. And when she saw her picture, she said, I definitely remember that, because George went down like it was somebody's pet cat and was just petting the thing and wasn't scared at all. She goes, I was terrified. I wasn't going to touch that thing for anything. Yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable. Tom, when you got the pictures, what did you have to do to?
Well, when I first saw them, they were in two little 4x4 comb bound brag books, like you would get back at that time from the drugstore or the photo lab. They were black and white Kodak Instamatic photographs.
Oh my.
But they were amazing. I mean, they were in great shape. They had been stored well enough that time had not taken any kind of toll on them. And they were basically all good prints. So because I treated them as historical documents, I brought my scanner over to her apartment and I scanned them at high resolution. And basically all I did to them was remove any dust spots. I kept the original border because they were 4x4 bordered black and white prints. I kept the original border, and I cleaned the border so that it looked even and a nice white, like it would have back in the day. And other than that, I took care of any dust spots that were in the sky or anywhere on the photo, and I left it at that, because I'm not going to put these through AI and have George popping off the photo like he was just here. These are historical documents.
Our two most recent shows were a discussion of Alan G. Parker's new film, Borrowed Time, Lennon's Last Decade. In show number 107, we talked to Alan G. Parker, who told us about the making of the film, and he also told us about the plan that John Lennon had to tour to support Double Fantasy. It was a very lavish plan, which he features drawings from in the movie, and he also had a specific reason for doing such a very lavish plan, which he talks about in this clip.
John said, I don't care what you design, just make sure it gives Mick and Elton fucking ulcers. And so it was going to be this massive big show that I would say arguably no one could have competed with in 1981, because no one's thinking that far ahead. And the other thing, the final thing to add is, again, this didn't seem to start happening until about 2010, 2012, another decade, 2-3 decades later. They were going to hit towns and stay there, much like, say, bands like Metallica and U2 do now. So you don't just do a show and leave. You come into a town, stay there for 5 nights, then move on and do another 4 nights somewhere else, right? That was John and Yoko's idea. So this tour was only big, or going to be big. It was absolutely years ahead of its time in planning. To sort of finalize this and get to your next question, within a month of seeing these diagrams, I've got Earl Slick on board. I've got the tour manager on board, Henry the Horse. I've got my old friend Andy Peebles, who obviously had heard things from John about this tour. I've got Mark on camera. I've got the engineer from Double Fantasy, John, who was going to be the front of house sound guy on the tour. And I've also got a couple of journalists. And I'm thinking, wow, we've gone from these 9 lines on a Google search to having the whole story. Passed the diagrams to the animation boys and went, You know, there's that famous Kevin Costner baseball movie where they use the line, if you build it, they will come. I said, build it, because believe me, they're going to come. And we're going to put this story in the movie with the biggest John Lennon story that no one's ever told before, ever in 40 odd years since he died.
In the show before this one, we talked to Alan Weiss, who worked at the local ABC affiliate in New York City on December 8th, 1980. He was leaving work that night and got into an accident on his motorcycle and ended up in Roosevelt Hospital, where he was put right in the middle of the action when John Lennon was brought into the hospital. Here he talks about the report that Howard Cosell gave on the air and what happened before they announced it on the air and how it was vetted by the network.
Listen, we have to remember that this is a game and just a game, but we do have something to report. We just have learned from ABC News that John Lennon, possibly the most famous Beatle, has been shot. Now, you asked me what happened from the time I called the newsroom to the time Howard announced it on ABC. I was always pretty sure that they weren't going to go on the word of some news producer for local news that they've never met. And there's always been this snobbery between network and local. And if I were them, I wouldn't either. I wouldn't go on one phone call from one person, especially if I don't know that person. So they must have called and somehow or other got collaboration. And the reason why I know that as a fact, even though I never asked anybody about it, is I did not know how many times John had been shot. When Cosell announced it, he said that Lennon had been shot twice, and he said that Lennon was dead. We need to wind back the clock a little bit because a number of things happened with me to get the word out between the time I called the assignment desk and sat down and watched them trying to save Lennon's life and then the announcement on ABC Network.
Go ahead.
So I was sitting there, and suddenly the doors at both ends of the emergency room opened up, and it seemed like every security guard in the hospital comes running in, and they say, "Lay down." I said, "No, I'm happy sitting here. Lay down." So I laid down on the gurney, and they wheeled me out of the emergency room, and they put me in a room right outside the emergency room, which was very interesting for two reasons. In the emergency room, there's no music. In the hospital, which I was now in, there's music. And I made a note. I called WABC around 11 o'clock, as I told you. About 10 minutes after that, about 11:10, the music on the hospital speakers played the song All My Lovin'. I had never heard a Beatles song on music in that hospital, but that night at 11:10 was the song All My Lovin'.
This clip is from show 89, and it was our tribute to Joey Molland, who passed away this past year. We had an interview with Joey in 2017 that we had not previously released in audio before. We'd used it on our Examiner column, but we put up a good chunk of the interview for you to hear. And on this clip, he talks about John Lennon calling him to work on the Imagine album.
How about working with John Lennon on the Imagine album? What was that like?
Oh, it was great with John Lennon. Are you kidding me? we got a phone call one night, or one afternoon really, and only Tommy and I were at the house. Tommy Evans and myself were at the house. Everybody else was out, and they, as it happened, they wanted us to go down. Joe called us, John's driver, and said, John would like you to do him a favor. If you could grab your guitars, we'll send a car round and bring you down here. We're recording tonight, and we need some acoustics and stuff. So again, they asked us to do them the favour of going and playing some guitar. So we went down there, and we're all excited. It's John Lennon's, you know. And we got down there. We couldn't find anybody. The house was so big. We were walking around different rooms, found a room full of Dr. Pepper, found the library. We couldn't get in and out. The doors were all library shelves, you know. And so that was kind of weird. But eventually we found our way to the back of the house. And that's where the studio was. It was just off the kitchen. And there was George and Phil Spector. Jim Keltner was there to play drums that night. And Klaus Vorman again. And Nicky Hopkins there playing the piano. We knew Klaus and Nicky, of course. Never met Jim Keltner, but he was a very, very nice bloke. Fantastic drummer, of course. Mm-hmm. And then around 9:30, 10 o'clock, John and Yoko came in, and really nice. You know, they were really sweet, both of them. John was a bit brusque, you know, the way he talked and everything. You know, he didn't mind. You know, he didn't mind saying a swear word now and again. But you know, he was pretty straightforward with us. Yoko was really sweet, running and getting cokes and cigarette. You know, she actually asked us, did we want her to drive out and get some cigarettes for us? But of course we were okay. But she was really sweet anyway, and the whole experience was great. John started off with Jealous Sky. Just played it to us 2 or 3 times, and we kind of grabbed the chords. Everybody kind of, you know, grabbed the chords and fooled around with it a bit, and we played it maybe 2 or 3 times, and then we recorded it 2 or 3 times. And it was all together. It was really easy, nice little beautiful song, and John singing in the headphones, and these are all the things that I remember, just enthralled, you know, and just great. And then we did I Don't Want to Be a Soldier. And John told us we didn't need to stay. He didn't really think it would work for acoustics, but it really did work when we played along with him. Made for this lovely, nice kind of fat, Bo Diddley sound, you know. So, which is what the song always reminded me of anyway. But it sounded really good. Anyway, and that was the song that they gave us credit for. Actually, not for Jealous Sky.
You didn't get credit for Jealous Sky.
No, I don't think so. I think they just credited us for that. But I Don't Want to Be a Soldier. Yeah.
How about contrast that with All Things Must Pass, because you worked on that too.
Well, of course, yeah, we were a lot more involved in All Things Must Pass. We played on most of it, if not all of the record. I don't know whether he used us on all the tracks, but we certainly played along on all of them. It was just a bit of a deeper experience, but the same kind of thing, really. The great songwriter, the great artist, and just a pleasure to be there and be surrounded by all, you know. Eric was there every day playing guitar. Ringo was there. Alan White was there. Billy Preston was there. Klaus Vorman, Phil Spector. You know, the whole cast of characters. And then different people came in. I remember Eric was forming Derek and the Dominoes right then. And so they all came in and hung out.
Our last clip is from Ringo Starr's virtual press conference with the All-Star Band, just ahead of going out on tour again. This was done in September, and Ringo was asked, first of all, how he kept joy in these turbulent times, and he was also asked for a comment on the anthology, which had just been announced as being reissued. Here's Ringo's answers to both of those questions.
How do you continue to maintain joy and a positive attitude given how challenging life can be? Do you have any advice for having that perspective through difficult times?
I think, you know, it's not like we don't have hard times, but playing gives us a different mood all the time. I love to play, and I know this band love to play, and we're playing with each other. It's like, you know, you're hanging out in a good space. So I think we're blessed that we're playing for that. You know, that it doesn't take our mind off the rest of the world. It just centers the musical part of our brain and our hearts, and we do the best we can.
One of the greatest parts is looking out in the audience. You'll see somebody with a yellow submarine cut out, and somebody in the pink pepper suit, and you give, well, this is a Ringo song, you give love, and they give love back.
Yeah.
And that's so energizing.
Part of the way of keeping your sanity when you're touring is to have a routine, you know, because it can be a grind. I mean, we have fun when we're on stage. That's the fun part, you know, but we get paid to travel. You know, and so I find that if I have a routine, it keeps me, you know, it keeps me stable and level, and I don't go crazy.
I call the stage my emotional moat. That when I'm on stage performing, there's no, the rest of the world can't bother me. And I think the most important thing about what we do is the gratitude we have that we can do it. And we play with these great people. The music is, I'm grateful for that.
It's a great way to channel whatever else is going on in the world, and there's a lot of negativity, there's a lot of division, there's a lot of that going on, so it's a way to counter that and spread a lot of love and a lot of joy, and to continue to do that, to counter the rest of what's going on in the world. And it's also a great distraction from that, you know. But it's a way of letting yourself know and the audiences know that it's not all that, you know. It's still, as Ringo would say, you know, peace and love is the way, and it has to be that way in the long term. So we get to do our part in sharing that with people.
Yeah, it's a super positive thing. I mean, it's great playing everybody's tunes and watching as the audience reacts to all these tunes. And it's a positive thing. I don't think anybody can walk out of there after the show without like a smile on their face. It is a real upbeat, positive thing.
Yeah, if we're playing, we're even up on the downer songs.
Wow. Yeah, there is that. This is the greatest job on planet Earth. Everybody in the world would want to have our job. I mean, everything these guys said, 100%, but I'm very grateful every day to be able to do this at this level with all these great cats and all the wonderful audiences that have come out to see us wherever we play.
Thank you. This is for Ringo and it's about the anthology coming out this fall. And have you seen episode 9? And what do you think about this new version of the anthology that's coming out?
I think the new version is great, and I haven't seen episode 9, so I can't tell you anything about it, so it's going to be a surprise to me too.
And here's some late-breaking news. Last week, the Fest for Beatle fans announced in a surprise email that the fests for 2026 in New York and Chicago will be on pause. In other words, there will be no live fests next year. They did say that they are going to be revealing plans for next year, but they haven't said exactly what they are yet, and they also have said they will announce at some point what the plans are beyond 2026. And we hope to have that information soon, and as soon as we get it, of course, we'll pass it on to you. But we wanted to let you know, especially if you're not in the US, that those two events will be not happening next year. Again, we hope to have some information soon on what will happen to the fests, and we will give it to you as soon as we get it. One other piece of news. On December 19th, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Abbey Roads Beatle page website. The website was really kind of a thing where I used information that I got from the newspaper I worked at and posted it online, and we put a lot of we made a lot of news headlines that way that nobody had reported. I know we were the first to report the concert for George. We followed George's illness very closely, and we had stuff that was not well known. We got up the night that he died. Thank you, Joe Caldwell, for phoning me in the middle of the night. And we were up all night posting that. There were so many things that happened over the course of that website, and I know there were a lot of people that really enjoyed what we did, and we thank you all. But 30 years, it's hard to believe. There we go.
Thanks very much for listening to our podcast today. If you enjoyed our program, we'd really appreciate a positive review at the place where you get your podcasts. Apple and Google love positive reviews, and it really helps us. If you don't already, please subscribe to our show so you'll get our newest shows right away. And if you have any suggestions for the show, please write to us at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com or catch us online on Facebook, Twitter, and Blue Sky. And please tell your friends about us. We appreciate you all for listening. Now here again is Steve Marinucci.
Well, that's it for today, and we hope you enjoyed listening to the highlights of our past shows, and we hope it makes you want to hear more of them. You can hear more of them, or you can binge listen to them at bystevemarinucci.blogspot.com. You can also hear them at marinucci.podbean.com, or you can search for them on YouTube. They're all on YouTube. Until next time, this is your host, Steve Marinucci, saying,
"Be seeing you."
Wonderful, wonderful.